How do bad teams manage to rebuild in just 1 year? The Houston Texans did it in 2023. The Los Angeles Chargers and the Washington Commanders did it in 2024. They all finished with 5 or less wins, but the next season magically rebuilt their roster to win double-digit regular season games and make the playoffs. How is that possible? How did they do it so quickly when it seems like it takes other teams year after year after year to do the same thing? On the surface, it may seem like all you need is the right quarterback, but after some deep digging, I found 4 factors that all those teams had in common that led to their success the following year. And at the end of this video, I will share which teams walking into next season all share those 4 factors that the Commanders, the Chargers, and the Texans did when they rebuilt in 1 year. The baseline here is a culture-changing head coach. We all know in 2023, the Houston Texans hired a former player in DeMeco Ryans to come in and completely overhaul what the Texans had in terms of their coaching department. It was very, very clear to see the impact that DeMeco Ryans had on the field and in the locker room with the unit they had in Houston. Last year in 2024, we saw Jim Harbaugh do virtually the same thing with the Los Angeles Chargers, a guy who had already proven he could be successful in college and in the NFL, completely came in and overhauled the culture that was already in LA. They went from a flashy, air-it-out team throwing to guys like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams to a completely different, beat-you-up-front, ground-and-pound team, leaning into that with Joe Alt at the 5th overall pick, letting guys like J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards have equally prominent roles in the backfield. Harbaugh came in and completely changed the team's identity. And in Washington, Dan Quinn had a very similar impact. The guy who had already proven his success as a coordinator and as a head coach in the NFL walked into Washington with minimal infrastructure and completely changed the dynamic of that team. Despite what everybody had to say about him in the offseason, Dan Quinn believed in a vision and in his first year came in and changed the culture. Just so we're all on the same page moving throughout the video, there are 7 teams that fall into that category of having a new, quote, culture-changing head coach. The Las Vegas Raiders have Pete Carroll. The Dallas Cowboys have Brian Schottenheimer. The New England Patriots have Mike Vrabel. The Chicago Bears have Ben Johnson. The New York Jets have Aaron Glenn. The New Orleans Saints have Kellen Moore. And the Jacksonville Jaguars have Liam Cohen. That's 7 teams that are all walking into this season, at least with a similar baseline to the 3 teams that overhauled their culture and made a dramatic rebuild the year after. We'll revisit those teams at the end. Let's talk point number 2. It may seem like a given when looking at how bad a team was the year before jumping into the following season, but it really matters playing a 4th place schedule. Believe it or not every team that finishes with 5 or less wins is going to finish last in their division and play a 4th place schedule. There are teams that finish with 4, 5 wins that have to play a 3rd place schedule because somebody else in their division was that much worse than them. In 2022, the year before, the Houston Texans were dead last in the AFC South and played that 4th place schedule, much like the Chargers and Commanders did after finishing dead last in their respective divisions in 2023, jumping to 2024. Now, this does not have an immediate effect on the overall strength of schedule, which we will talk about later on in the video, but it does make a difference in a couple opponents that you play within your conference. To put it into perspective, teams that finished in 4th place in 2024 in the AFC would play the Cleveland Browns instead of playing the Cincinnati Bengals. There are 2 distinctions for that when looking at the projection for it in this upcoming season. If you finish 4th place in your division in the AFC, you would wind up playing teams like the Cleveland Browns and the Las Vegas Raiders instead of playing teams like the Cincinnati Bengals and the Denver Broncos, 2 perennial playoff teams that if you finished in 3rd in your division in the AFC, you would have to play instead of the bottom feeders if you finished 4th. Again, this does not affect your overall view of the strength of schedule, but the 2024 Commanders, the 2024 Chargers, and the 2023 Texans all finished dead last and avoided those tier above matchups, if you will, that they would have had to play in a 3rd place schedule that they avoided with the 4th place schedule. Sticking on the schedule, we're going to move to point number 3, the strength of schedule, which I think is arguably the most important point in this entire list. The 23 Texans, the 24 Chargers, and the 24 Commanders were all outside the top 12 in terms of strength of schedule based on records from the year prior. In 2023, the Texans had the 7th easiest schedule walking into that season. In 2024, the Commanders were tied for the 16th easiest schedule, and the Chargers were tied for the 5th easiest schedule. Playing bad opponents will very clearly benefit you as a team that's just looking to get double-digit wins and potentially make the playoffs. We're not talking about winning a Super Bowl here. We're talking about making the playoffs. So that strength of schedule feature is wildly important for some of these teams. And you may be thinking, oh, shouldn't all bad teams have a really easy schedule walking into last year based on the fourth place schedule they have, based on the opponents they have within their division? Shouldn't you think easy schedules should come to bad teams? No, that's not the case. Again, we will finish talking about the 7 teams that are up for this dramatic rebuild at the end, but 2 of them are actually in the top 10 for hardest schedules in the NFL, which makes me believe they can't have this type of rebuild. The fourth and final factor before we talk about the 7 teams that are potentially eligible for this dramatic rebuild is the ultimate get-right game. It's playing the Cleveland Browns. I know that may sound odd, but it's the truth. The 23 Texans, the 24 Chargers, and the 24 Commanders all had a, quote, get-right game against the Cleveland Browns. The Chargers and Commanders beat the Browns in 24, but in 2023, the Texans used this get-right game to rest a lot of their players that were injured. They wound up losing the game with Case Keenum at quarterback. CJ Stroud did not play, and they still had this get-right week lining up from the Cleveland Browns in whatever week of the season it was. Recapping all of this, the 4 factors for this dramatic rebuild in order to win 5 or less games and then magically make the playoffs next year, very, very straightforward. You got to have your culture changed by a new head coach. That's the baseline. You not only have to play a 4th place schedule, but you also have to be outside the top 12 in terms of how difficult your overall schedule is based on the records for the teams last year. And you got to have the get-right week against the Cleveland Browns. We talked about those 7 teams at the beginning. The Cowboys, the Bears, the Saints, the Patriots, the Jets, the Jaguars, and the Las Vegas Raiders. Believe it or not, only 2 of those 7 actually meet the criteria we just talked about with the 4 factors. Walking into this season, the Chicago Bears and the Dallas Cowboys are top 5 in hardest schedules in the NFL. Bears tied 2nd, Cowboys tied 5th, means they don't fall under this umbrella of having immediate success after a rebuild after a bad year the year before, right? Does not mean they can't make the playoffs, but if we're looking at these factors, those 2 teams do not match the schedule part. I also talked about the importance of playing a 4th place schedule. Well, the Jacksonville Jaguars and the New York Jets have to play a 3rd place schedule. For the Jaguars, it means they have to play teams like the Jets and the Bengals instead of the Patriots and the Cleveland Browns. And for the Jets, it means they have to play a perennial powerhouse in the Denver Broncos and the Jacksonville Jaguars instead of the Titans and the Raiders. That brings us to the New Orleans Saints, the New England Patriots, and the Las Vegas Raiders. But the New Orleans Saints don't have the get-right game against the Cleveland Browns this year. They did last year, but they don't have it. The Las Vegas Raiders and the New England Patriots do. That means that they fall under this umbrella, meeting the 4 key factors for having a dramatic rebuild after a bad year the year before. But can it actually happen? I think you look at the Las Vegas Raiders, who bring in Pete Carroll and can have that similar Jim Harbaugh culture overhaul approach, and think, yes, this team is going to look dramatically different. You believe in Geno Smith. He's been pretty good. I just don't know if they can do it in the AFC West. You look at that division with the Kansas City Chiefs, who are probably a playoff team, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Denver Broncos, who were both playoff teams the year before. That's 6 of your 11 games. It's a really, really tough draw for a team that's trying to rebuild their culture. I am also not convinced defensively that they can do it. In a loaded AFC, you're going to have to win 10-plus games to make the playoffs as one of those final wildcard spots, unless you think the Las Vegas Raiders can take the AFC West. I find it a little harder to believe that the Raiders can do it, especially compared to what the New England Patriots have. For all intents and purposes, if everything falls into place for the New England Patriots, they could be the 2nd best team in their division. They got the culture overhauling coach in Mike Vrabel, who's a former player, very similar to DeMeco Ryans in that sense, but they also completely transformed their defense. All 3 levels the New England Patriots improved upon: the defensive line, the secondary, and the linebacker room. That defense looks dramatically different, and they're going to be much better because of it. The offensive line is a big issue. I get it. You got to keep Drake May upright, but you have Drake May, a guy who was not upright last year, who still looked pretty good. You bring in Stephon Diggs. I think this New England Patriots offense can be a little bit better, assuming they have some semblance of a run game with Ramondre Stevenson, Travion Henderson, and their schedule is a cakewalk. A cakewalk. Jets twice, Dolphins twice for all intents and purposes. The Giants, the Browns, the Saints. This team could win double-digit games for all I care. But the only reason they can is because they meet the 4 pieces of criteria that we outlined before. Got to have a culture-changing head coach. You got to play a 4th-place schedule. You got to have an easy schedule. And you absolutely need to play the Cleveland Browns. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and make sure to subscribe. If you're new, we will see you next time. God bless.